When horse trainer Sierra Blake arrives at the Montana ranch, where a stallion has killed his owner's wife, she expects a challenge. But as secrets unravel between man and beast, healing reveals deeper wounds. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Sierra Blake pulled her old pickup truck to a stop at the entrance of the Rourke estate. The tall iron gates made her feel small, out of place. She'd worked at plenty of wealthy ranches before, but this place was different. It wasn't just a ranch. It was an empire of land that stretched as far as the eye could see across the Montana highlands. Just another job, she reminded herself, adjusting the worn cowboy hat on her head. At 38, Sierra had spent most of her adult life moving from ranch to ranch, earning her reputation as the best horse whisperer in the country. Her phone never stopped ringing with desperate owners, hoping she could work her magic on their troubled horses. But this call had been different. The man's voice had been gruff, almost broken. "I've tried everyone else," he'd said. "You're my last hope." Now, as the gates swung open automatically, Sierra took a deep breath. She wasn't just here for a horse. She was here for a horse that had killed someone, the wife of the man who'd hired her. The driveway seemed to go on forever, winding through perfectly maintained fields. When the main house finally came into view, Sierra whistled under her breath. It was a massive log mansion with a wraparound porch and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the mountains behind it. A tall figure stood waiting on the steps. Even from a distance, Sierra could see the stiffness in his posture, the way his hands were shoved deep in the pockets of his expensive jeans. Sierra parked and stepped out, grabbing her duffel bag from the back seat. She'd learned to travel light over the years. A lifetime of never staying in one place had taught her that much. "Mr. Rourke?" she called, walking toward him. "Gavin," he corrected, not moving from his spot. "You must be Sierra Blake." Up close, Gavin Rourke was even more intimidating than she'd expected. At 45, his face was handsome but hard, lined with grief and something else, anger, maybe. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to look right through her. "That's me," Sierra said, extending her hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." Gavin's handshake was firm but brief. "Let's get one thing straight. I didn't hire you to talk about my wife. I hired you to fix my horse." Sierra didn't flinch at his coldness. She'd met plenty of difficult clients before. "Fair enough. When can I see him?" "Now, if you're ready." Gavin turned without waiting for an answer and began walking toward a large stable complex off to the side of the house. Sierra followed, taking in her surroundings. Everything about the property spoke of money and careful maintenance. Everything, except the man walking in front of her, who seemed as broken as the horse she'd come to help. "Tell me about Tempest," Sierra said, lengthening her stride to keep up with him. "Andalusian stallion, 7 years old. Best horse I've ever owned," Gavin said shortly. "Until the accident. And since then, he's turned vicious, attacked 3 trainers, won't let anyone in his stall. I've had experts tell me he should be put down." Sierra nodded. She'd heard this story before, different details, but the same pain. "And why haven't you?" "Put him down, I mean." Gavin stopped suddenly, turning to face her. The pain in his eyes was raw now, unguarded. "Because he was hers, my wife's favorite, and because you blame him," Sierra finished softly. "But you're not sure if you should." Something flickered in Gavin's expression, surprise maybe, that she had read him so easily. "I don't pay you to psychoanalyze me, Ms. Blake. No, you pay me to understand horses, and to understand a horse I need to understand what happened to him." Sierra held his gaze. "Horses mirror our emotions. Whatever Tempest is feeling, fear, guilt, grief, it's connected to what happened that day." Gavin's jaw tightened. For a moment, Sierra thought he might send her away. Then he simply nodded and continued walking. The stables were as impressive as the house, modern facilities disguised with rustic charm. Sierra could smell the sweet scent of hay and the familiar musk of horses. It smelled like every temporary home she'd ever had. "The staff won't come near this section anymore," Gavin explained as they approached a separate wing of the stables. "I've been the only one feeding him for months." They stopped outside a large stall. A sign hanging on the door read, Danger, do not enter. Sierra moved forward slowly. Inside the dimly lit stall stood one of the most beautiful horses she'd ever seen, a glossy black Andalusian with a powerful build. But the moment Tempest sensed their presence, his ears flattened against his head, and his eyes rolled white. With fear, he charged at the door, hooves striking the wood with a force that made Gavin step back. Sierra didn't move. "He'll hurt you," Gavin warned. "No," Sierra said quietly. "He's hurting already. There's a difference." She placed her palm flat against the door, keeping her eyes locked with the Stallion's. Tempest snorted, pawing at the ground, but something in his posture had already changed. A slight lowering of his head, a questioning look. "What happened the day of the accident?" Sierra asked, not taking her eyes off the horse. Gavin's voice was flat, practiced. "Rebecca, my wife, took him out alone. She was an excellent rider. They'd gone on that trail 100 times. But something spooked him. He threw her into a ravine. She died instantly." Sierra heard the words he wasn't saying. "You weren't there." "I was in Seattle on business," Gavin said, his voice rough with an emotion Sierra couldn't quite place. "I should have been here." Sierra nodded, still watching Tempest. The horse had calmed slightly, his breathing less erratic. "And he came back alone?" "One of my ranch hands found him later that day, reins trailing, covered in sweat and scratches. They followed his tracks back and found her." Gavin's voice broke on the last word. Sierra finally turned to look at him. "I'll need 2 weeks with him minimum, and I work alone. He's dangerous." "So is unresolved grief," Sierra said simply. "For all of you." Something in Gavin's face hardened. "The guest house is prepared for you. Dinner is at 7, but the housekeeper can bring something to your cabin if you prefer." "I'll eat in my cabin," Sierra said. She always did. Getting close to clients and their families only made leaving harder. "And I'll need access to this stable at all hours." "You'll have it." Gavin handed her a key. "But I want daily reports." "You'll get them." Sierra looked back at Tempest, who was now standing quietly, watching her with wary eyes. "One more thing. I'll need to know where it happened. The accident." Gavin's face went pale. "Why?" "Because that's where the fear started. For both of you." For a moment they stood in silence, the only sound the soft nickering of horses from the other stalls. Then Gavin nodded curtly. "I'll have my foreman show you tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "Most people who come here are impressed by the house, the land. They ask questions, make comments." Sierra shrugged. "I'm not here for the house, I'm here for him." She nodded toward Tempest. Gavin studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Miss Blake." "Sierra," she corrected. "And what did you expect?" "Someone who cared more about the size of my checkbook than the size of the problem." Sierra gave him a small smile. "I've never been good at meeting expectations. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like some time alone with Tempest before dinner." After Gavin left, Sierra pulled a folding chair over to the stall door and sat down, just outside of kicking range. She didn't speak, didn't try to approach. She simply sat, letting Tempest get used to her presence. This was always the first step. Patience. Something most people didn't have enough of. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the stable floor, Sierra finally spoke, her voice low and gentle. "I know you're scared," she told the Stallion. "I know you're carrying something heavy. Me too." Tempest's ears flicked toward her, his dark eyes watching. "We'll figure it out together," Sierra promised. "That's what I do. I help horses remember who they are under all the fear." She stood up slowly. It was enough for today. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at Tempest. The Stallion had moved closer to the door, his nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The guest house turned out to be a charming cabin set apart from the main house, nestled among a stand of pines with a view of the mountains. Inside, Sierra found a cozy living room, a small kitchen stocked with food, and a bedroom with the most comfortable-looking bed she'd seen in months. She was unpacking her few belongings when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "I'm Martha, the housekeeper," the woman said with a smile. "I've brought you some dinner." "Thank you," Sierra said, stepping back to let her in. "You didn't have to do that." Martha placed a covered tray on the small dining table. "It's no trouble. Besides, I wanted to meet the woman brave enough to take on that horse." She hesitated. "And brave enough to take on Mr. Rourke." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "Is he that difficult?" "He wasn't always," Martha said, a sadness in her voice. "Before Mrs. Rourke died, this place was different, full of life. Parties on the lawn, music, laughter." She shook her head. "Now it's like a tomb." "How long has it been?" Sierra asked. She hadn't wanted to ask Gavin directly. 8 months, Martha answered. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like years." She sighed. "He hasn't been the same since. None of us have." Sierra nodded, understanding. Grief did that, stretched and compressed time until it lost all meaning. "The worst part is he blames himself," Martha continued. "They'd had an argument that morning before she went riding. He left for his business trip without resolving it. Now he can't forgive himself." Sierra took this in silently. It explained so much about the man she'd met today. The anger, the guilt, the walls he'd built. "Well," Martha said, straightening her apron, "I should get back to the house. Is there anything else you need?" "No, thank you," Sierra said. "This is perfect." After Martha left, Sierra sat on the porch of the cabin, eating the delicious stew and warm bread the housekeeper had brought. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, she could see the lights of the main house glowing against the darkening sky. She wondered if Gavin was in there alone, surrounded by reminders of what he'd lost. Sierra understood loneliness better than most. She'd spent her life moving from place to place, never letting herself get attached. It was easier that way. Her childhood in foster care had taught her that people left. Her one attempt at love in her 20s had reinforced the lesson painfully. Horses were different. They didn't lie, didn't pretend. Their fears and needs were honest, uncomplicated by the mess of human emotions. That night, Sierra dreamed of running. In her dream, she was on horseback, racing across an open field, the wind in her hair, freedom in every stride. But something was chasing her, a shadow she couldn't outrun. She woke in the early hours of the morning, the dream still clinging to her like cobwebs. Without hesitation, she dressed and headed back to the stables. The night watchman nodded to her as she passed, already aware that she had full access. Tempest was awake, his dark shape moving restlessly in the stall. When Sierra appeared, he stilled, watching her. "Can't sleep either, huh?" she said softly. She settled on her folding chair, pulling a book from her pocket, a worn paperback she'd read a dozen times. She began to read aloud, her voice low and soothing in the quiet stable. The old man was thin and gaunt, with deep wrinkles. In the back of his neck. She read for almost an hour, not looking at Tempest, just letting her voice fill the space between them. When she finally closed the book, she glanced up. The stallion had moved to the front of the stall, his head lowered, listening. "See you in the morning," Sierra whispered, standing up. As she walked back to her cabin in the pale pre-dawn light, she saw a figure standing on the porch of the main house, Gavin, a coffee mug in his hand, watching her. She raised her hand in a small wave. After a moment, he nodded in return. Two insomniacs in a house full of ghosts, Sierra thought. Maybe they weren't so different after all. The next day, Gavin's foreman, a weathered man named Sam, took Sierra to the site of the accident. They rode in a rugged ATV, climbing up into the hills behind the property. "Mr. Rourke doesn't come up here anymore," Sam explained as they bounced along a narrow trail. "Hasn't since it happened." Sierra nodded, understanding. Places held memories, good and bad. This place held Gavin's worst. They came to a clearing, and Sam stopped the vehicle. "This is where they think it happened," he said, pointing to a spot where the trail curved sharply near a steep drop-off. "Mrs. Rourke must have lost control right there." Sierra got out, walking slowly toward the edge. It was a beautiful spot, with the valley spread out below and mountains rising in the distance. A terrible place to die. She knelt, running her fingers through the dirt. What was she like? Rebecca? Sam removed his hat, holding it against his chest. Kind, funny, she treated everyone who worked here like family, and she loved that horse, raised him from a colt. Sierra looked out over the valley. So why would he throw her? A horse that trusted, that bonded? Nobody knows for sure, Sam said. Could have been a snake, a mountain lion, or maybe... Maybe what? Sierra pressed. Sam shifted uncomfortably. There were rumors about Mrs. Rourke, that she was unhappy. Planning to leave, Sierra stood up. Was she? Not my place to say, Sam replied, putting his hat back on. But if you're going to help that horse, maybe you need to understand the whole story. On the ride back, Sierra was quiet, thinking about what Sam had told her. If Rebecca had been planning to leave Gavin, it would explain his guilt, his anger, not just at the horse, but at himself. When they returned to the ranch, Sierra went straight to Tempest's stall. The stallion seemed more agitated than before, pacing and snorting. You remember that place, don't you? Sierra said quietly. Something happened there that scared you badly. She opened her bag and took out a halter. It was time to try the next step. Slowly, carefully, she opened the stall door just enough to slip inside. Tempest immediately backed away, eyes wide, nostrils flared. It's okay, Sierra said, keeping her voice steady. I'm not going to hurt you. She stood completely still, the halter hanging loose in her hand. Minutes passed. The only sound was Tempest's, heavy breathing and the occasional stamp of his hoof. Then slowly she extended her hand, palm up, empty. Your choice, she told him. Everything is your choice. Tempest took one step forward, then another. When he was close enough, he stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Sierra didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, miracles, Tempest's soft muzzle touched her palm. The lightest contact, there and gone in a second. It was enough for today. Sierra backed out of the stall slowly, leaving the door secure behind her. When she turned, she found Gavin standing there, his face unreadable. You went inside, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, that's the first time anyone's been in that stall with him since the accident. Sierra met his gaze. He's not vicious, Gavin. He's terrified. There's a difference. And you're not afraid. Of him? Sierra smiled slightly. I respect his power. That's not the same as fear. Gavin's eyes narrowed. Sam told me he took you to the accident site. I needed to see it. And did it help? Did standing where my wife died give you some special insight? His voice was bitter, challenging. Sierra didn't back down. It helped me understand what Tempest might have experienced, and yes, it gave me questions. What questions? Why would a trusted horse suddenly throw an experienced rider on a familiar trail? Sierra asked. Something happened up there. Something that scared him badly enough to make him forget all his training. Gavin's face hardened. He spooked, it happens. Maybe, Sierra conceded, or maybe there's more to the story. Are you here to solve a mystery or to train my horse? Gavin demanded. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sierra brushed past him. I need to prepare for tomorrow's session. As she walked away, Sierra could feel Gavin's eyes on her back. She'd pushed too hard, too fast, but she hadn't been able to help herself. There was something about this place, this man, this horse, a puzzle with missing pieces. That evening, as Sierra sat on her porch watching the sunset, she heard footsteps approaching. Gavin appeared, looking uncomfortable, hands in his pockets. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. I was harsh earlier. Sierra shrugged. You're grieving. Grief makes people harsh. That's no excuse. He hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair beside her. May I? Sierra nodded, surprised. Gavin sat down, his large frame making the wooden chair seem small. For a long moment he was silent, looking out at the mountains. Rebecca and I were having problems, he finally said, his voice low. The morning before the accident, she told me she needed space, wanted to move out for a while. He took a deep breath. I had a business trip I couldn't cancel. I told her we'd talk when I got back, but I was angry. We parted on bad terms. Sierra listened, not interrupting. When I got the call, Gavin's voice broke. All I could think was that our last moments together were spent fighting, that I'd left without telling her I loved her. That's why you can't get rid of Tempest, Sierra said softly. because he was the last thing to see her alive. Gavin nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Stupid, isn't it? No, Sierra said. It's human. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Why do you do this? Gavin asked suddenly. Move from place to place, fixing other people's problems? Sierra smiled faintly. Because horses make sense to me. People are harder. You seem to understand people just fine, Gavin said, glancing at her. Sierra looked at him, at the pain etched in his face, at the walls beginning to crack. Understanding isn't the same as staying, she said quietly. Something shifted in Gavin's expression, recognition perhaps of a kindred spirit. Someone else who knew what it was to lose, to hold back, to protect what little was left. Well, he said, standing up, I should let you rest. You have a big day tomorrow with Tempest. Good night, Gavin, Sierra said. Good night, Sierra. As he walked away, Sierra wondered if she'd made a mistake in coming here. This job was supposed to be about the horse, not the man, but somehow she couldn't separate the two anymore. Gavin's pain and Tempest's fear were intertwined, a knot she wasn't sure she could untangle without involving her own heart, and that was dangerous territory for a woman who'd spent her life avoiding attachments. With a sigh, Sierra went inside. On her nightstand lay her schedule for the next few weeks, the detailed plan she always made for each horse she worked with. But for the first time she found herself wondering what came after, when Tempest was healed and it was time to move on. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. That night, as Sierra drifted off to sleep, the wind whispered through the pines outside her window. It almost sounded like words. Stay, stay, stay. A ghostly invitation she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. The sun had barely risen when Sierra made her way to the stables the next morning. A light mist hung over the pastures, giving the ranch an almost magical quality. She carried a thermos of coffee in one hand and her worn leather bag in the other. Tempest was waiting for her, his dark head appearing over the stall door as soon as he heard her footsteps. Something had shifted. The small connection they'd made yesterday had changed something between them. Good morning, Sierra said softly, setting down her things. Ready for our first real day together? She pulled an apple from her pocket, cutting it into quarters with her pocket knife. Carefully, she extended her palm through the bars, offering the treat. Tempest snorted, backing away at first. Then, curiosity winning over fear, he inched forward again. His velvety lips brushed her palm. As he took the apple piece and Sierra smiled. That's it, she whispered. Small steps. Impressive, a voice said from behind her. Sierra turned to find Gavin watching, his arms crossed over his chest. In the early morning light, with his guard down, he looked younger, less burdened. You're up early, Sierra commented. I wanted to see if yesterday was a fluke, Gavin said, moving closer. It wasn't, was it? He trusts you already. Sierra shook her head. Trust takes time. This is just curiosity, but it's a start. She offered Tempest another piece of apple, and the horse took it more confidently this time. I'd like to try something today, Sierra said, but I'll need your help. Gavin raised an eyebrow. My help? I thought you worked alone? Usually I do, but Tempest isn't just my problem to solve, he's yours too. She met his gaze steadily. And if he's going to heal, you both need to heal together. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Gavin's face. I'm not good with feelings. Sierra almost smiled. I'm not asking you to write poetry. Just show up. Be present. After a moment, Gavin nodded. What do you need me to do? For now, just watch. Later, I might ask you to come closer, to let him get used to your presence again. Sierra spent the morning working with Tempest in his stall, gradually introducing the halter, letting him smell it, touch it with his nose, get used to the idea of it. Gavin sat on a hay bale a safe distance away, watching in silence. When Sierra finally managed to slip the halter over Tempest's head, her hands gentle but firm, she glanced back at Gavin with a small smile of triumph. He returned the smile, and something warm flickered in Sierra's chest, a feeling she quickly pushed away. This wasn't about her or Gavin, it was about the horse. I'd like to get him out of the stall tomorrow, Sierra said, as they walked back toward the house later. He's been cooped up too long. He needs to remember that the world isn't just four walls. Isn't it too soon? Gavin asked, worry creasing his brow. Sometimes the hardest step is the most necessary one, Sierra replied, thinking of her own life, how she'd always run away when things got too real, too close. Hiding from fear only makes it stronger. Gavin was quiet for a moment. Like how? I've avoided that trail since the accident. Sierra glanced at him, surprised by his insight. Exactly like that. They reached a fork in the path, one way leading to the main house, the other to Sierra's cabin. Join me for dinner tonight, Gavin said suddenly. In the house, Martha's been complaining that I eat alone too often. Sierra hesitated. Eating alone was part of her routine, her protection against getting too attached. Just dinner, Gavin added, as if sensing her reluctance. Nothing more? Okay, Sierra found herself saying. Just dinner. Later that evening, Sierra stood in front of the small mirror in her cabin, running a brush through her long brown hair. She'd changed from her work clothes into the one nice outfit she traveled with, a simple blue dress that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. It's just dinner, she told her reflection firmly. Don't make it more than it is. The main house was even more impressive inside than out. High ceilings, massive stone fireplaces, expensive furniture that somehow still managed to look comfortable. But what struck Sierra most were the photographs, dozens of them, showing a smiling blonde woman with bright eyes and an infectious grin. Rebecca. She loved to be photographed, Gavin said, appearing beside her as Sierra studied a large portrait. Said it was proof she'd existed, that she'd been here. There was a deep sadness in his voice, but not the raw pain of before. More like an old ache, familiar now. She was beautiful, Sierra said. Yes, Gavin agreed. Inside and out. He gestured toward the dining room. Shall we? Dinner was less awkward than Sierra had feared. Martha had prepared a feast, roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and seemed delighted to be serving 2 people instead of 1. It's good to hear voices in this dining room again, the housekeeper said warmly, pouring wine for them both. Conversation flowed more easily than Sierra expected. They talked about horses, about the ranch, about the books in Gavin's extensive library. They carefully avoided talk of the past, of losses, of the ghosts that haunted them both. It was only when Martha brought out dessert, apple pie with ice cream, that Gavin broached a more personal subject. Why horses? He asked. Of all the things you could have done with your life, why choose this? Sierra considered her answer, taking a bite of pie to buy time. When I was 12, she finally said, I was in my 4th foster home. Not a good one. The kind where you learn to make yourself invisible. She stared down at her plate. There was a neighbor with an old mare. The gentlest animal you've ever seen. I started sneaking over there after school. Gavin listened intently, his blue eyes fixed on her face. That horse never asked questions, never wanted anything from me except maybe an apple or a kind word. She just accepted me. Sierra smiled at the memory. When you grow up never belonging anywhere, that kind of acceptance is like finding water in a desert. And you've been moving from ranch to ranch ever since, Gavin said softly, never staying long enough to put down roots. Sierra looked up sharply. It's easier that way. Easier maybe, Gavin agreed, but lonely. Sierra couldn't argue with that. But loneliness was safer than the alternative, the risk of loving and losing again. What about you? She asked, turning the conversation away from herself. You built all this. Was it what you always wanted? A shadow passed over Gavin's face. I built it for Rebecca. She loved this land, loved the idea of having a place where people could gather, where she could raise... He stopped, his voice catching. Children, Sierra finished for him. Gavin nodded. We were trying before the accident. It was one of the things we'd argued about. She thought I worked too much, that I wasn't ready to be a father. He laughed without humor. She was probably right. Sierra reached across the table before she could stop herself, her hand covering his. I'm sorry, Gavin. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Gavin turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers. The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt through Sierra that frightened her with its intensity. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. I should go. Early start tomorrow with Tempest. Gavin didn't try to stop her. Of course, thank you for joining me. Sierra nodded, already heading for the door. Good night, Gavin. Sierra, he called after her. When she turned, he was standing too, silhouetted against the warm light of the dining room. For what it's worth, I think you'd make a wonderful mother. The words hit her like a physical blow, touching on a dream she'd long ago buried. Sierra couldn't speak, could only nod again before hurrying out into the cool night air. Back in her cabin, Sierra paced the small living room, her mind racing. What was she doing? Getting close to Gavin Rourke wasn't part of the job. Letting him see past her carefully constructed walls wasn't part of the plan. In 2 weeks, maybe less if Tempest responded well, she'd be gone, on to the next job, the next temporary home. That was how it always worked. That was how it had to work. She couldn't afford to start thinking about what it might be like to stay. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for what Sierra had planned. She arrived at the stables early, halter in hand, determined to focus solely on Tempest. But when she reached his stall, Gavin was already there, talking softly to the stallion. Morning, he said, looking up at her approach. If he felt any awkwardness after last night, he didn't show it. I thought I'd help today, if that's still okay. Sierra nodded, relieved at his businesslike tone. It is. I want to get him outside, into the small corral. Working together, they managed to halter Tempest and lead him, trembling but compliant, out of the stall that had been his prison for months. The stallion's steps were hesitant at first, then more confident as they entered. The sunlight. The corral was small but sturdy, with high wooden fences. Sierra led Tempest to the center, then unclipped the lead rope, letting him free. For a moment, the horse stood frozen, as if disbelieving his freedom. Then, with a joyful snort, he took off, galloping around the perimeter, his black mane and tail flying in the wind. Sierra laughed out loud at the sight. Beside her, Gavin was smiling too, a real smile that reached his eyes. He remembers who he is, Sierra said, watching Tempest run. Underneath all that fear, he's still the same horse. People aren't so different, Gavin said quietly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Tempest explore his newfound freedom. After several laps, the stallion slowed, coming to a stop near where they stood at the fence. Go to him, Sierra urged Gavin. Just stand there. Let him approach you if he wants. Gavin hesitated, then entered the corral, moving slowly to the center. Tempest watched him warily, ears pricked forward. Talk to him, Sierra called softly. Let him hear your voice. Gavin began to speak, his deep voice gentle. Hey, boy, remember me? We used to be friends, you and I. Tempest snorted, pawing the ground. Then, to Sierra's amazement, he took one, stepped toward Gavin, then another. That's it, Gavin encouraged. It's just me. When Tempest was within arm's reach, he stopped, nostrils flaring as he caught Gavin's scent. Gavin stood perfectly still, letting the horse make the choice. Sierra held her breath, watching the delicate dance of trust rebuilding between man and animal. Slowly, slowly, Tempest stretched his neck, his muzzle coming to rest against Gavin's outstretched palm. Gavin's face transformed with wonder. He looked across the corral at Sierra, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, he mouthed silently. Sierra smiled, her own eyes damp. This was why she did what she did. For moments, like this, when the barriers came down and healing began. But as she watched Gavin gently stroke Tempest's neck, Sierra felt a pang of something unexpected, not just professional satisfaction, but something deeper, more personal. She was happy for Gavin, happy in a way that went beyond just doing her job well. It was a dangerous feeling, one she couldn't afford to nurture. The day's session with Tempest went better than Sierra could have hoped. By afternoon, the stallion was following Gavin around the corral like a puppy, all fear apparently forgotten. Don't let it fool you, Sierra cautioned, as they walked back to the stables together, Tempest following behind. We've made good progress, but trauma doesn't disappear in a day. He'll have setbacks. Like people, Gavin said again. Sierra glanced at him. You keep saying that. Because I keep seeing the parallels, Gavin replied. How you work with him, the patience, the acceptance, it's how we should treat each other too. The observation was so insightful, so unexpectedly vulnerable, coming from this outwardly hard man, that Sierra didn't know how to respond. Thankfully, they were interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black car coming up the driveway. Gavin's expression immediately shut down, the openness of moments before replaced by a guarded wariness. "Who is it?" Sierra asked. "Rebecca's parents," Gavin said tightly. "They visit once a month. Check up on me on the estate." Sierra could hear the tension in his voice. Should I make myself scarce? Gavin looked at her, something like panic in his eyes. "Would you mind staying?" "They can be difficult." Sierra hesitated, then nodded. She'd agreed to help with Tempest. She hadn't signed up for family drama, but the look of relief on Gavin's face made her decision worth it. The Montgomerys were everything Sierra had expected, and more: wealthy, polished, and coldly judgmental. Eleanor Montgomery, a slim woman in her 60s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, air-kissed Gavin's cheeks before turning her critical gaze on Sierra. "And who might this be?" she asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Sierra Blake," Gavin introduced. "She's helping with Tempest, the horse that killed our daughter," Roger Montgomery said sharply. He was tall like Gavin, but with none of his warmth, a man made of sharp edges and cold stares. "I thought we agreed that animals should be put down." "You agreed," Gavin corrected. "I didn't." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Darling, it's been 8 months. Rebecca wouldn't want you living like this, alone in this big house, clinging to painful reminders." "I'm not alone," Gavin said, his hand finding the small of Sierra's back in a gesture that seemed both protective and possessive. "And Tempest isn't just a painful reminder. He was important to Rebecca." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, taking in the casual touch, the way Sierra and Gavin stood together. "I see. Moving on already, are we?" The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and accusing. "Ms. Blake is a professional horse trainer," Gavin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's here to do a job." "Of course she is," Roger said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Well, we won't intrude on your professional relationship. We just came to check on the estate, Rebecca's estate." The emphasis was unmistakable, a reminder that half of everything Gavin had built had belonged to their daughter. "Let me show you the new improvements to the east pasture," Gavin said stiffly, clearly trying to move the conversation to safer ground. "Sierra, would you mind checking on Tempest?" Sierra nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape. As she headed back to the stables, she could feel Eleanor Montgomery's calculating gaze following her. Whatever grief the Montgomerys felt for their daughter, it had curdled into something bitter and grasping. Sierra had seen it before, the way loss could twist people, make them hard and cruel. She spent the next hour with Tempest, using the work to clear her head. The stallion seemed to sense her distraction, nudging her gently when she paused too long between instructions. "Sorry, boy," Sierra said, patting his neck. "Just some human complications. Nothing you need to worry about." When Gavin finally appeared at the stable door, his face was drawn and tired. "They're gone," he said. "Finally." Sierra nodded, continuing to brush Tempest's gleaming coat. "They seem horrible," Gavin supplied. "They weren't always. Before Rebecca died, they were different. Or maybe I just saw them differently, through her eyes." "Grief changes people," Sierra said softly. "Not always for the better." Gavin came to stand beside her, taking another brush from the tack box and joining her in grooming Tempest. The simple, shared task seemed to soothe him. "They want to contest the will," he said after a while. "They think Rebecca would have changed it given our problems." Sierra kept her hands moving, giving him space to talk. "They might be right," Gavin continued. "If she'd lived long enough to leave me, who knows what would have happened to all. This," he gestured vaguely, indicating the ranch, the land, everything he and Rebecca had built together. "Is that what you're afraid of?" Sierra asked. "Losing the ranch?" Gavin shook his head. "I'm afraid of losing the last connection to her. This place was her dream more than mine. Without it," he trailed off. "Without it, you'd have to find your own dream," Sierra finished for him. Gavin looked at her, startled by her insight. "Yes, and I'm not sure I know how anymore." The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep in Sierra, a recognition of her own fear of dreams, of wanting things that could be taken away. They finished grooming Tempest in companionable silence. When they were done, Gavin walked Sierra back to her cabin. "Thank you," he said as they reached her door. "For today, for staying." "It's my job," Sierra said automatically. "Is it?" Gavin asked, his gaze intent. "Is that all this is to you?" The question hung between them, dangerous and alluring. Sierra knew she should say yes, keep the boundaries clear. But standing there in the fading light, with Gavin looking at her like she was something precious and rare, the lie wouldn't come. "I don't know," she admitted finally, "and that scares me." Gavin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Me too." He stepped back, giving her space. "Good night, Sierra." "Good night, Gavin." Inside her cabin, Sierra leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. What was happening to her carefully ordered life, her rules about never getting involved, never staying too long? She moved to the small desk where her calendar lay open. 2 weeks. That's what she'd promised Gavin. 2 weeks to heal his horse, and then she'd be gone, onto the next job, the next temporary home. But for the first time in years, the thought of leaving brought no relief, only a hollow ache in her chest. The next few days fell into a rhythm, mornings with Tempest, who was making remarkable progress. Afternoons exploring the vast ranch property. Evenings with Gavin, sharing meals and stories, carefully dancing around the growing attraction neither of them acknowledged out loud. Sierra learned about Gavin's childhood in a small Montana town. His drive to build something lasting, his love for Rebecca that had been real and deep despite their problems. In turn, she shared more than she'd intended about her own past. The string of foster homes, the one heartbreak in her 20s that had taught her love wasn't worth the risk, her dreams of someday having a place of her own. One evening, they rode out to watch the sunset from a ridge overlooking the valley. Tempest, who was now comfortable with both of them, carried Gavin, while Sierra rode a gentle mare from the main stables. They dismounted at the top, letting the horses graze while they sat on a fallen log. "He's almost back to his old self," Gavin said, watching Tempest. "You've worked a miracle." Sierra shook her head. "No miracles, just patience and understanding. He was never really broken, just lost for a while." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the fading light, with the mountains spread out before them, it was easy to believe in the possibility of new beginnings. "What happens when you're finished?" Gavin asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Where will you go next?" Sierra shrugged, trying to sound casual. "There's a ranch in Colorado that's been calling. They have a mayor with trust issues." She stared at the horizon. "There's always somewhere else to go, another horse to help. And if someone asked you to stay?" Gavin's question was soft, almost lost in the evening breeze. Sierra's heart stuttered. "No one ever has. Maybe no one knew they should." She turned to look at him then, finding his blue eyes intently watching her. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. "Gavin," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, a crack of thunder split the air. Both horses lifted their heads, alarmed. "Storm coming," Gavin said, standing quickly. "We should head back." The moment was broken, which was probably for the best, Sierra told herself as they mounted up and began the ride home. Getting involved with Gavin would only complicate things, make leaving harder, and she always left. That was the one constant in her life. They were about halfway down the trail when the storm hit in earnest, rain coming down in sheets, wind whipping through the trees, lightning flashed, followed immediately by booming thunder. Tempest, despite his progress, began to panic. Sierra watched in alarm as the stallion reared, nearly unseating Gavin. "Easy, boy," Gavin called, fighting to regain control. Another lightning strike, closer this time. Tempest reared again, his eyes rolling white with fear. This time Gavin couldn't hold on. He fell backward, hitting the ground hard. "Gavin!" Sierra shouted, jumping down from her own horse. She ran to where he lay, still and silent in the mud. For one terrible moment, her mind flashed to Rebecca. Another rider fallen, another life potentially lost. Fear gripped her, cold and paralyzing. Then Gavin groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Tempest?" he gasped. Sierra looked around wildly, The stallion had bolted, disappearing into the storm. "He ran," she said. "Are you hurt?" Gavin sat up slowly, wincing. "Just bruised, I think, nothing broken." He looked in the direction Tempest had fled, his face grim. "We need to find him. In this storm, he could hurt himself. Or worse." "You need to get back to the house," Sierra insisted. "You could have a concussion." "I'm not leaving him out there alone," Gavin said firmly, struggling to his feet. "Not again." Sierra recognized the determination in his voice. This wasn't just about the horse, it was about redemption, about not failing again. "Okay," she agreed, "but we go together." She whistled for her mare, who had remained nearby, less spooked than Tempest. "Can you ride?" Gavin nodded, wincing slightly as Sierra helped him mount. They set off in the direction Tempest had fled, rain lashing at their faces, thunder still rolling overhead. They found him half a mile away, trapped in a gully, one leg caught in a tangle of fallen branches. The stallion was wild-eyed with fear, thrashing desperately to free himself. Sierra dismounted quickly, approaching with caution. "Easy, boy," she called over the storm. "We're here to help." But Tempest was beyond reason, his primal fear overriding the trust they'd built. Each time Sierra tried to get close, he lashed out, hooves striking dangerously near her head. Gavin joined her, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Let me try," he shouted over a clap of thunder. Sierra hesitated. "He's too scared. He could hurt you." "He could hurt himself worse if we don't get him out," Gavin countered. "I need to do this, Sierra. I need to help him this time." Something in his voice, a plea, a need for redemption, made Sierra step back. "Be careful," she said. Gavin moved forward slowly, talking constantly to the frightened horse. "Remember me, Tempest. It's okay, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." Miracle. Of miracles, the stallion began to calm, Gavin's voice penetrating his fear. Inch by inch, Gavin got closer, until he could touch Tempest's heaving flank. "That's it," he said soothingly. "Let's get you free." Working together, Sierra and Gavin carefully removed the branches trapping Tempest's leg. The horse had cuts and scrapes, but nothing appeared broken. "Can he walk?" Sierra asked, examining the leg with gentle hands. Gavin nodded. "I think so. But we should lead him, not ride." They made their way slowly back to the ranch, leading both horses through the storm. By the time they reached the stables, all four of them were soaked to the skin and exhausted. After settling the horses, making sure Tempest's injuries were tended to, they trudged back toward the house. The storm was easing now, the thunder more distant. "You should change," Sierra said, gesturing to Gavin's muddy, soaked clothes. "Get warm before you catch pneumonia." "So should you," Gavin replied. Then, before Sierra could protest, he took her hand. "Come to the house. You can borrow some of Rebecca's things." The invitation surprised her, but Sierra was too cold and tired to argue. She followed Gavin into the main house, up a grand staircase, and into what was clearly the master suite. "Bathrooms through there," Gavin said, pointing. "Towels in the cabinet. I'll find you something dry to wear." Sierra nodded her thanks, escaping into the elegant bathroom. She peeled off her wet clothes, stepping into the huge shower. The hot water was blissful, washing away mud and fear alike. When she emerged, wrapped in a fluffy towel, she found a set of clothes laid out on the countertop. Soft sweatpants, a t-shirt, and a warm sweater, all clearly feminine. Rebecca's clothes? Sierra hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but the alternative was her own wet things, so she dressed quickly, trying not to think about the woman who had worn these clothes before. When she came out, Gavin was waiting, also changed into dry clothes. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at his neck. He looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. "They fit okay?" he asked. Sierra nodded. "Thank you." A fire was crackling in the bedroom fireplace, casting warm light over the room. Despite its size, the space felt intimate, personal. "I'll go back to my cabin now," Sierra said, suddenly aware of where they were, alone, together, in his bedroom. "The storm's still bad," Gavin said, gesturing to the windows where rain lashed against the glass. "Stay, just until it passes." Sierra knew she should refuse, but she was tired, and the fire was warm, and something in Gavin's eyes made it impossible to leave. "Okay," she agreed. just until the storm passes." They sat on the thick rug in front of the fire, Sierra with her knees pulled up to her chest, Gavin leaning back against the foot of the bed. "You were amazing out there," Gavin said, his voice low. "The way you stayed calm, knew exactly what to do," Sierra smiled faintly. "So were you. The way you got through to Tempest when he was that scared, I've never seen anything like it." "I just kept thinking about Rebecca," Gavin admitted. "How I wasn't there when she needed me. I couldn't fail again." "You didn't fail her, Gavin," Sierra said gently. "Accidents happen. People leave. Sometimes there's nothing we can do to stop it." "Is that what happened to you?" Gavin asked. "Someone left." Sierra looked into the flames, memories surfacing that she usually kept buried. "His name was Jake. We were young. I was 23. He was 25. He promised me everything. Love, family, a home. I believed him." She laughed without humor. "Then his ex-girlfriend came back, pregnant with his child. He chose them, the ready-made family." "I'm sorry," Gavin said, his voice sincere. Sierra shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me something important. Promises get broken. People leave. The only person I can count on is myself. And that's why you keep moving," Gavin said. "Why you never stay anywhere long. Can't get left if you leave first," Sierra confirmed, trying to make it sound like a joke, but the words came out sad instead. Gavin moved closer, his hand finding hers on the rug. "What if you found a reason to stay?" Sierra looked up, meeting his gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle like the lightning outside. "I'm afraid to even think about that," she whispered. "Me too," Gavin admitted. "After Rebecca, I thought I was done. That part of my life was over. And now?" Sierra's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Instead of answering, Gavin leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Sierra found herself moving toward him, drawn by a force stronger than all her carefully constructed defenses. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, then deeper, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection. Gavin's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch reverent. Sierra lost herself in the kiss, in the warmth of his arms as they wrapped around her, in the rightness of being held after so long alone. But as his hands began to move, exploring new territory, reality came crashing back. She was in his house, wearing his dead wife's clothes, falling into something she couldn't control. She pulled back suddenly, breathless. "I can't," she gasped. I'm here to do a job, Gavin. Nothing more." Hurt flashed across his face, followed by understanding. "I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "It's not just you," Sierra interrupted. "It's me too. I don't know how to stay. How to be what someone needs long term." "I'm not asking for promises," Gavin said softly. "Just don't run yet. Give us a chance." Before Sierra could answer, a new sound cut through the storm, the telephone ringing downstairs. Gavin sighed, standing reluctantly. "I should get that. It might be Sam checking on the horses." Sierra nodded, grateful for the interruption, the chance to collect her thoughts. Gavin disappeared downstairs. Minutes stretched into 5, then 10. When he finally returned, his face had changed, the openness gone, replaced by a closed, guarded expression. "What is it?" Sierra asked, alarmed by the transformation. "That was the Montgomery's lawyer," Gavin said, his voice flat. "They've filed papers contesting the will. They're claiming that Rebecca was leaving me, that she told them she'd changed her mind about us, about the ranch." Sierra stood, moving toward him. "Gavin," he held up a hand, stopping her. "They mentioned you, said I'd moved on suspiciously quickly, implied that maybe I wanted Rebecca gone." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. "That's ridiculous," Sierra said firmly. "No one who knows you could believe that." "Isn't it what you thought at first?" Gavin challenged. "That I blamed the horse because I couldn't face blaming myself?" Sierra couldn't deny it. She had wondered, in the beginning, what Gavin's role in all this had been. "The worst part is," Gavin continued, his voice breaking, "sometimes I wonder if they're right. If I drove her to it that day, taking that ride alone, pushing Tempest too hard because she was angry with me." "You can't think that way, Sierra." insisted. You'll drive yourself crazy with what-ifs. Gavin laughed bitterly. Too late. He raked a hand through his hair. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe what happened earlier was a mistake. The words stung, but Sierra understood. Grief wasn't linear. Neither was healing. Just when you thought you were moving forward, the past could rise up and pull you back. I should go, she said quietly. The rain's letting up. Gavin didn't try to stop her. He looked lost again, adrift in his guilt and grief. Sierra gathered her still damp clothes and headed for the door. At the threshold she paused, looking back, at him standing alone by the fire. For what it's worth, she said softly, I don't believe you could ever hurt someone you loved. Not deliberately, not even through neglect. She took a breath. And neither did Tempest. That's why he still trusts you despite everything. Gavin looked up, something shifting in his expression. How can you be so sure? Because animals know, Sierra said simply. They see the truth in us even when we can't see it ourselves. She slipped out before he could respond, hurrying through the rain to her cabin. Sierra didn't sleep that night. She sat on her cabin porch, watching the storm fade, listening to the drip of rain from the eaves. Her mind wouldn't quiet, replaying. The kiss, the accusations, the look on Gavin's face when he talked about Rebecca. By morning, Sierra had made a decision. She would finish her job with Tempest, maintain professional distance from Gavin and leave as planned. No complications, no messy feelings, just like every other job before. But when she arrived at the stables, her resolve wavered. Gavin was already there, tending to Tempest's cuts and scrapes, his movements gentle and sure. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Morning, he said quietly. How is he? Sierra asked, nodding toward Tempest. Better than expected. No serious damage. Gavin stepped back, giving her space to examine the horse. Sierra, about last night. We don't need to talk about it, she interrupted quickly. It was the storm. The adrenaline. It didn't mean anything. Hurt flashed in Gavin's eyes. Is that what you believe? Sierra couldn't look at him. It's what I need to believe. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was Tempest's soft breathing and the occasional stamp of his hoof. The Montgomery's lawyer called again this morning, Gavin finally said. They're coming out here tomorrow with the lawyer. They want to discuss a settlement. Sierra nodded, keeping her focus on Tempest. That might be for the best. End the fighting. Maybe, Gavin agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. There's something else. They want me to put Tempest down as part of the agreement. Sierra's head snapped up. What? That's ridiculous. He's practically recovered. Gavin's face was grim. They say he's a danger, a reminder of what happened. He's not a danger, Sierra insisted. Yesterday was different. The storm frightened him. Any horse would have spooked. I know that, Gavin said, and so do they. This isn't about safety. It's about control, about punishing me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sierra now recognized as frustration. I can give them the money, part of the land, but I can't. His voice broke. I can't fail Rebecca again. I can't let them destroy something she loved. Sierra felt her heart ache for him. Despite her resolution to keep her distance, she moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. Then don't. Fight for him. For her. Gavin covered her hand with his own. Will you stay? Help me convince them Tempest is safe now. Sierra hesitated. Staying meant getting more involved, not less. Meant making herself vulnerable to the pain of leaving later. But looking at Gavin, at the hope in his eyes, she couldn't say no. I'll stay, she agreed. For Tempest. For Tempest, Gavin echoed, though something in his voice suggested he knew there was more to it than that. They spent the day working with Tempest, putting him through his paces, documenting his responses to different commands and situations. If they needed to prove his rehabilitation to the Montgomerys and their lawyer, they would have evidence. By afternoon, Sierra could see that Gavin was exhausted, the strain of the coming confrontation wearing on him. Go rest, she told him. I'll finish up here, Gavin shook his head. I'm fine. You're not, Sierra said firmly, and you need to be at your best tomorrow. Go, sleep. I've got this. After a moment's hesitation, Gavin nodded. "Thank you," he said simply, and the gratitude in his voice made Sierra's chest tighten. After he left, Sierra continued working with Tempest, running through the exercises they'd developed. The stallion was responsive, alert, showing no signs of the fear that had plagued him for months. "You're going to be okay," she told him, stroking his gleaming neck. "And so is he. You'll take care of each other when I'm gone." The thought of leaving brought an unexpected lump to her throat. In just over a week, she'd become attached, not just to Tempest, but to this place, to Gavin. Later that evening, as Sierra was finishing dinner in her cabin, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Martha, Gavin's housekeeper, standing there with a worried expression. "Is everything all right?" Sierra asked. Martha twisted her hands in her apron. "It's Mr. Rourke. He's in a bad way. I found him in Mrs. Rourke's studio, looking through her things, drinking." Sierra frowned. "Did something happen?" "He got another call from those people, Mrs. Rourke's parents," Martha said, her disapproval clear. "I don't know what they said, but it upset him terribly." Sierra hesitated. Getting involved further was dangerous, but the thought of Gavin alone, drowning in guilt and whiskey, made her decision for her. "Where's the studio?" she asked. "North wing of the house," Martha replied. "Top floor, you can't miss it. Glass walls, views of the mountains." She hesitated. "He won't like that I came to get you." "Probably not," Sierra agreed. "But sometimes what we want isn't what we need." The studio was exactly as Martha had described. A beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows and skylights, designed to capture the Montana light. Canvases were stacked against the walls, and art supplies covered various tables. The room smelled of paint and turpentine, and now whiskey. Gavin sat on a low couch in the center of the room, a nearly empty bottle beside him, staring at a large unfinished painting on an easel. He didn't look up when Sierra entered. "Martha sent you," he said, his voice rough. "She's worried about you," Sierra replied, moving closer. "So am I." Gavin laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Don't be, I'm fine. Just, reminiscing." Sierra glanced at the painting, a landscape, the ranch viewed from the hills, rendered in bold, confident strokes. "Rebecca's?" she asked softly. Gavin nodded. She was talented, could have been a professional if she'd wanted, but she was always modest about it, said it was just a hobby. Sierra sat beside him, careful to leave space between them. "What happened?" "With the Montgomerys." Gavin took another drink straight from the bottle. "They found her diary, brought it up during the call, said it proves she was unhappy, that she was planning to leave." His face crumpled. "Maybe they're right. Maybe she was." "Even if she was," Sierra said gently, "that doesn't mean you deserve what they're trying to do to you now. Or to Tempest." Gavin looked at her then, his blue eyes bloodshot but piercing. "Why are you here, Sierra? You could have walked away." "Should have, probably." It was a fair question, one Sierra had been asking herself all day. "Because I care," she admitted finally. "About Tempest, about you. Even knowing I'm a mess? That I failed my wife so badly she might have been trying to leave me. We all fail the people we love sometimes," Sierra said quietly. "It's part of being human. The question is what we do afterward." She reached out, taking the bottle from his unresisting fingers and setting it aside. "And right now you need to sober up. Tomorrow's too important." Gavin sighed, running a hand over his face. "You're right. As usual." He stood, a bit unsteady. "I'll go clean up." "Good idea," Sierra said, rising too. "I'll make coffee." In the kitchen, Sierra moved around uncertainly, opening cabinets until she found what she needed. Martha had gone home for the night, leaving them alone in the big house. When Gavin reappeared, his hair was damp from a shower, and he'd changed into fresh clothes. He looked more like himself, though the shadows hadn't left his eyes. "Better?" Sierra asked, pushing a mug of coffee toward him. "Getting there," he admitted, taking a sip. "I'm sorry you had to see that." Sierra shrugged. "We all have our moments." They sat at the kitchen island, drinking coffee in companionable silence. Outside, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the ranch. "Tell me about her," Sierra said suddenly. "Rebecca." The real her, not the saint or the villain the Montgomerys. I want to make her. Gavin looked surprised by the request, then thoughtful. She was complicated, passionate about everything, art, nature, justice. She could charm a room full of strangers or sit alone for hours watching birds. A small smile touched his lips. She snorted when she laughed. Really laughed, I mean. Hated it about herself, but I loved it. Sierra nodded, encouraging him to continue. She could be stubborn, Gavin went on. We fought about that, her unwillingness to compromise, and about my work. I was away too much, focused on building the business. His face clouded. The last few months, things were strained. We'd been trying for a baby without success. It put pressure on both of us. That's hard, Sierra said softly. For any couple, Gavin nodded. The morning before the accident, she told me she needed space, that she wasn't sure about us anymore. His voice caught. I was hurt, angry, said things I regret. Then I left for Seattle without resolving it. And then she went riding alone, Sierra finished. Yes, Gavin said, his gaze distant. If I'd stayed, talked it out, maybe she wouldn't have gone out that day. Or maybe I'd have been with her. Could have helped somehow. Sierra reached across the island, covering his hand with hers. Or maybe you'd have both been hurt. We can't know, Gavin. That's the hardest part. He turned his hand over, fingers intertwining with hers. Thank you, he said quietly. For listening. For not judging. That's not my job, Sierra replied with a small smile. And what is your job exactly? Gavin asked, something lightening in his expression. Because it seems to have expanded considerably from just training a horse. Sierra laughed, softly. Apparently it now includes midnight coffee and therapy sessions. Their eyes met across the island, the moment stretching between them, full of possibilities and danger. This time it was Sierra who broke the connection, pulling her hand away gently. You should rest, she said, standing. Big day tomorrow. Gavin nodded, though reluctance was clear in his face. Will you stay in one of the guest rooms, he added quickly. It's late to be walking back to the cabin alone. Sierra hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but just to sleep. Just to sleep, Gavin agreed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The guest room was elegant and comfortable, with a large four-poster bed and windows overlooking the garden. Sierra lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet creaks of the old house, thinking about the man sleeping down the hall. She was breaking all her own rules, getting involved, letting herself care. It would make leaving harder, would risk reopening old wounds that had never fully healed. But maybe, a small voice whispered in her mind, maybe this time could be different. Maybe she didn't have to leave. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Sierra finally drifted off, dreams filled with horses running free and a pair of blue eyes that saw too much. Morning came too soon. Sierra woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sound of voices. The Montgomerys had arrived early. She dressed quickly in the clothes Martha had thoughtfully laid out for her, clean jeans and a simple blue blouse, and made her way downstairs. The voices grew louder as she approached the living room. Absolutely unreasonable, a woman was saying. Eleanor Montgomery, her tone sharp and accusing. After everything that's happened, you still refuse to see sense. Your definition of sense and mine differ considerably, came Gavin's reply, his voice controlled but tight with tension. Sierra paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Gavin stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid. Across from him sat the Montgomerys. Eleanor perched on the edge of the sofa, Roger standing behind her. Beside them was a thin man in an expensive suit, the lawyer presumably. All heads turned as Sierra entered the room. Eleanor's eyes narrowed with recognition and dislike. Ah, the horse trainer, she said, her tone making the title sound like an insult. How convenient that you're still here. Ms. Blake has been invaluable in Tempest rehabilitation, Gavin said firmly. In fact, that's what I was trying to explain. The horse is no longer dangerous. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Montgomery, perhaps we should discuss this privately without outside parties present. Sierra started to back away. I can go. No, Gavin said sharply. Sierra stays. She's part of this. The words hung in the air, loaded with meaning beyond the immediate situation. Very well, the lawyer said, though he didn't look pleased. As I was saying, my clients are prepared to drop their challenge to Mrs. Rourke's will under certain conditions. The first being the, disposition of the animal in question. Tempest is not being put down, Gavin stated, flatly. That's non-negotiable. Eleanor made a sound of frustration. That horse killed our daughter. No, Sierra found herself saying. All eyes turned to her. Tempest didn't kill Rebecca. It was an accident. Horses spook, even well-trained ones. Even with riders they trust. And what would you know about it? Roger demanded. You weren't there. No, but I've worked with Tempest for over a week now, Sierra replied calmly. He's not aggressive or dangerous. He was traumatized, yes, afraid, but he's healing. We have documentation, Gavin added, moving to a side table where a folder lay. Waiting. Sierra has kept detailed records of his progress, video of his training sessions. He's safe now. The lawyer took the folder, flipping through it with a neutral expression. This is all very thorough, but it doesn't change the fact that my clients feel strongly. This isn't about Tempest, Sierra interrupted, her patience wearing thin. Is it? Eleanor flushed. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Sierra said. This is about punishing Gavin, about making him suffer because you're suffering. How dare you? Roger stepped forward, his face reddening. You know nothing about our family. Sierra held her ground. I know that Rebecca loved that horse, and if she loved him, she wouldn't want him destroyed out of spite or misplaced vengeance. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, Eleanor began to cry. Not the controlled, elegant tears she'd displayed before, but deep, wrenching sobs. She was our only child, she said through her tears. Our beautiful girl, and she was unhappy here. She told us so. Gavin's face paled. What do you mean she told you? Roger put a protective arm around his wife. She called us, the day before the accident, said she was thinking about leaving, coming home for a while. Sierra watched Gavin absorb this blow, saw the pain flash across his face, but instead of retreating into guilt as he had before, he straightened his shoulders. I know we had problems, he said quietly. I know I wasn't the husband she deserved toward the end, but I loved her, and she loved this place, these animals. Even if she was going to leave me, she wouldn't want Tempest harmed. Eleanor wiped her eyes, some of her composure returning. Maybe not, she admitted reluctantly. She always did care more about animals than common sense. The lawyer cleared his throat again. Perhaps we could discuss a compromise. If the horse is truly rehabilitated, as you claim, what if he were relocated? To another ranch, perhaps? Someplace where he wouldn't be a reminder? Sierra felt her heart sink. If Tempest left, she would have no reason to stay. The job would truly be over. But to her surprise, Gavin shook his head. Tempest stays here. This was his home with Rebecca. It's his home now with me. He glanced at Sierra, something warm in his eyes. With us. The possessive pronoun sent a shiver through Sierra, us, as if they were already a unit, a team, something permanent. Roger's face darkened. If that's your position, we have no choice but to proceed with our challenge to the will. Then proceed, Gavin said calmly. Rebecca's wishes were clear in her will. This ranch, everything we built together stays intact, including Tempest. The meeting deteriorated from there, with the lawyer making increasingly complex legal arguments and the Montgomerys' anger giving way to calculated threats. Through it all, Gavin remained steady, unshakable in his conviction. Sierra found herself watching him with growing admiration. This was a different man from the haunted, guilt-ridden figure she'd met just days ago. This was someone finding his strength again, his purpose. When the Montgomerys finally left, their threats of extended legal battles hanging in the air, Gavin closed the door behind them with a sigh of relief. That went well, he said dryly. Sierra couldn't help but laugh. Is that what you call it? Gavin smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. They'll calm down eventually. Come around, or not. He shrugged. Either way, Tempest stays. You were incredible in there, Sierra said softly, standing your ground like that. I had backup, Gavin replied, his eyes holding hers. Makes a difference. He hesitated, then said, What I said in there, About us. I hope that wasn't presumptuous. Sierra felt her heart beat faster. Gavin, But before she could finish, Martha burst into the foyer, her face pale with alarm. Mr. Rourke, it's Tempest. There's something wrong with him. They raced to the stables, fear clutching at Sierra's chest. Had the Montgomerys done something? Or had Tempest injured himself somehow? They found the stallion in his stall, breathing heavily, his legs splayed as if to keep himself upright. His usually bright eyes were dull with pain. Colic, Sierra diagnosed immediately, recognizing the symptoms. Bad, from the looks of it. Gavin's face went white. That can kill a horse. Not if we act fast, Sierra said, already moving into action. Call the vet, now. While Gavin made the call, Sierra worked quickly, removing hay and water from Tempest's stall, then beginning to walk him slowly around the paddock. Movement could help with mild colic, but Tempest's case looked serious. Vet's on his way, Gavin said, joining her. What else can we do? Keep him moving if possible, Sierra instructed. Talk to him, keep him calm. For the next hour, they walked Tempest in slow circles, murmuring encouragement, watching anxiously as his condition seemed to worsen. By the time the vet arrived, a gruff, capable woman named Dr. Lawson, Tempest was sweating profusely, occasionally trying to lie down and roll, a dangerous sign. How long has he been like this? The vet asked, quickly examining the horse. Not sure, Sierra admitted. We found him about an hour ago. Dr. Lawson nodded, her expression grave. I need to run some tests, but from the looks of it, we're dealing with an impaction colic, possible twist in the intestine. That's bad, isn't it? Gavin asked, his face ashen. It's serious, the vet confirmed. We need to get ahead of it fast. She turned to her bag, preparing medications. I'm going to give him something for the pain, then some oil to try to move things along. But if it's a twist, she didn't need to finish. They all knew surgery would be the only option. Expensive, risky, with no guarantees. Whatever it takes, Gavin said firmly. Just save him. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Medication, more walking, monitoring vital signs. Tempest's pain seemed to ease somewhat with the drugs, but his condition remained precarious. We need to make a decision, Dr. Lawson said late in the afternoon. The medications aren't working as well as I'd hoped. If it is a twist, waiting too long decreases his chances significantly. What do you recommend? Gavin asked. Transport to the equine hospital in Bozeman. Possible surgery tonight. Gavin nodded without hesitation. Let's do it. While Dr. Lawson made arrangements, Gavin and Sierra prepared Tempest for the journey. The horse looked miserable, his eyes dull with pain despite the medication. He's going to be okay, Sierra said softly, stroking his neck. He's strong. A fighter? Gavin nodded, his jaw tight with worry. Like someone else I know. Their eyes met over Tempest's back, a moment of understanding passing between them. The horse trailer arrived, and with careful maneuvering, they loaded Tempest inside. Dr. Lawson would follow in her truck, while Gavin and Sierra rode in Gavin's SUV. The drive to Bozeman was tense, neither of them speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. Sierra found herself praying, something she hadn't done in years, for Tempest to pull through. At the equine hospital, things moved quickly. More tests, consultations with specialists, decisions to be made. It is a twist, the surgical specialist confirmed grimly. Not the worst I've seen, but serious. Surgery is his best chance. What are the risks? Sierra asked. Significant, the surgeon replied honestly. Recovery is hard, complications are common, but he's young, in good condition otherwise. I'd give him a 60% chance. And without surgery? Gavin asked. The surgeon's face softened with sympathy. I wouldn't expect him to make it through the night. Then we operate, Gavin said firmly. Whatever it costs. As Tempest was prepped for surgery, Gavin and Sierra found themselves in a small waiting room, hours stretched ahead of them. The procedure would take at least 3 hours, possibly longer. You should go back to the ranch, Gavin said after a while. Get some rest. I'll call when there's news. Sierra shook her head. I'm staying. Gavin gave her a tired smile. I thought you might say that. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for everything. He's special to me too, Sierra said softly. I want to be here. They settled in for the wait, drinking bad coffee from the vending machine, occasionally making small talk that did little to mask their shared anxiety. As midnight approached, Sierra found herself fighting to stay awake, her head nodding despite her best efforts. Without a word, Gavin guided her to rest against his shoulder. She felt the warmth of him, solid and reassuring, and allowed herself to lean in. What if we lose him, she murmured, the late hour and exhaustion breaking down her usual defenses. We won't, Gavin said, his voice low but certain. He's too stubborn, like his trainer. Sierra smiled weakly. And his owner. Gavin's arm tightened around her. Get some sleep if you can. I'll wake you if there's news. Despite her worry, Sierra felt herself drifting off, lulled by Gavin's steady heartbeat beneath her ear. She woke to gentle shaking and Gavin's voice. Sierra, the surgeon's here. She sat up quickly, blinking away sleep, her heart racing with fear. But the surgeon's face held a cautious smile. He made it through, she announced. The surgery went as well as we could have hoped. We removed the twist, and there was minimal damage to the surrounding tissue. Relief flooded Sierra, so intense she felt lightheaded. Beside her, Gavin let out a shaky breath. When can we see him? He asked. He's in recovery now, the surgeon explained. You can peek in, but he'll be groggy from the anesthesia. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. We need to watch for complications, infection, adhesions, that sort of thing. They followed her to the recovery area, where Tempest lay on a thick bed of straw, his sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable, a far cry from the powerful stallion Sierra knew. Hey, boy, Gavin said softly, kneeling beside him. You did great. Rest now. Sierra stood back, watching the tenderness in Gavin's face as he stroked Tempest's neck, murmured encouragement. Something shifted in her chest. A certainty, a recognition. This man, with his capacity for love and loyalty, was someone rare, someone worth risking her heart for. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet peace. You should go home, the surgeon advised after a few minutes. Get some real rest. We'll call if there's any change. Gavin looked, reluctant to leave, but nodded. You'll call no matter what time, I promise, the surgeon assured him. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both of them exhausted but relieved. Dawn was breaking as they pulled up to the house, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. You should sleep, Gavin said as they entered the foyer. I know I need to. Sierra nodded, suddenly shy. Your guest room available again? Gavin hesitated, then shook his head. I was thinking, my room, just to sleep, he added quickly. But I'd like to have you close. The request was vulnerable, honest. Sierra felt her walls crumbling. Okay, she agreed softly, just to sleep. In Gavin's room, they didn't bother with pretense. Still fully clothed, they collapsed onto the bed, too exhausted for anything but rest. Gavin's arm wrapped around Sierra's waist, pulling her against his chest, and she went willingly, fitting herself against him as if they'd been sleeping this way for years. What if he doesn't make it? Gavin whispered in the dim room. Sierra turned, in his arms facing him. Then we'll know we did everything we could, that we didn't give up on him. Gavin's eyes, so close to hers, were filled with emotion. I'm done giving up, he said softly, on anything that matters. The words hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Sierra reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. So am I, she whispered. Their lips met in the gentlest of kisses, not like the passionate, desperate connection of before, but something deeper, more certain. A beginning, not an escape. When they broke apart, Sierra saw something in Gavin's eyes she hadn't expected. Peace, as if some final piece had fallen into place for him. Sleep now, she said softly. Tomorrow will come soon enough. They drifted off together, tangled in each other's arms, two lonely souls finding harbor after too long adrift. Sierra woke several hours later to the sound of a phone ringing. Gavin stirred beside her, reaching for the bedside table with sleep-clumsy hands. Hello? He mumbled, then sat up straighter. Yes, this is he. Sierra felt her body tense, watching Gavin's face for clues. After what felt like an eternity, he thanked the caller and hung up. "Well?" Sierra asked, her heart in her throat. A smile broke across Gavin's face. "He's awake, alert, taking water. The surgeon says he's doing better than expected." Relief washed through Sierra. She launched herself at Gavin, wrapping her arms around his neck in a spontaneous hug. His arms came around her immediately, holding her close. "He's going to be okay," Gavin murmured into her hair. "Our boy is going to be okay. Our boy." The casual claim of shared responsibility made Sierra's heart swell. This was what she'd been running from all her life. The risk and joy of belonging, of being part of something bigger than herself. "When can we see him?" she asked, pulling back just enough to look at Gavin. "Later today, if his condition remains stable. He'll need to stay at the hospital for at least a week, maybe longer." Sierra nodded. That made sense. Colic surgery had a long, difficult recovery period. Tempest would need careful monitoring, specialized care. "I should call Martha," Gavin said, reluctant to let go of Sierra. "Let her know the news." Sierra smiled, pressing a quick kiss to his lips before pulling away. "I'll make coffee." As she padded to the kitchen, Sierra felt lighter than she had in years. Tempest was going to recover, and she was letting herself feel again, hope again, dream again. She found Martha already in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with vigorous movements. "Oh!" the housekeeper exclaimed, seeing Sierra. Her eyes took in Sierra's rumpled clothes, her hair mussed from sleep. A knowing smile touched her lips. "Good morning, dear. I was just about to bring up some breakfast." Sierra felt herself blushing, but couldn't find it in herself to be embarrassed. "Tempest made it through surgery," she said. "He's doing well." Martha's face lit up. "Thank God. That's wonderful news." She wiped her hands on her apron. Sit, I'll make you both a proper breakfast. You must be starving." Sierra realized she was, in fact, ravenous. She hadn't eaten since lunch the day before, too worried about Tempest to think about food. Gavin joined them a few minutes later, freshly showered and changed. He greeted Martha with the news about Tempest, then moved to Sierra's side, his hand resting casually on her shoulder, a small gesture of affection that felt both new and completely natural. Over breakfast, they discussed Tempest's recovery plan. He would need special feed, medication, limited exercise for weeks. The ranch hands would need instructions for his care once he returned. "I should update my training notes," Sierra said, pushing away her empty plate. "Document everything, for whoever takes over his care." A small frown creased Gavin's brow. "Whoever takes over?" Sierra felt her heart stutter. "I meant, and for your staff. When I..." She couldn't quite say the word leave. Gavin's hand found hers under the table. "That's something we need to talk about." Martha, with the intuition of a long-time household manager, began clearing dishes. "I'll just take these to the kitchen, shall I?" she said, diplomatically leaving them alone. Once she was gone, Gavin turned to Sierra, both hands now holding hers. "I know this is fast," he said quietly. "Too fast, maybe. And I know you have a life, other commitments, but I want to ask you to consider staying, not just for a few more weeks, but longer." Sierra's heart raced. How much longer? Gavin's eyes held hers, unguarded and sincere. "As long as you want. Permanently, if that's something you could imagine." The offer hung in the air between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and enormity. "What about your guilt?" Sierra asked softly. "About Rebecca?" Gavin sighed, his thumbs tracing circles on her hands. "I'll always love her, always miss her, but these past weeks, watching you with Tempest, being with you, I've started to understand something. Guilt doesn't honor her memory. Living does." He squeezed her hands gently. "And I want to live again, Sierra. With you, if you'll stay." Sierra felt tears prick her eyes. All her life she'd been the one leaving, protecting herself from the pain of rejection, of being sent away. Now someone was asking her to stay, to belong. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to do this. How to stay in one place with one person. I've never let myself try." "I'm scared too," Gavin confessed. "Scared of losing again. Scared of failing you like I failed her." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly. "But I think maybe we could be scared together. Figure it out as we go." Sierra looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been running from, and everything she'd been longing for. Connection, understanding, home. "I need time," she said finally. "To think about it, to be sure." Disappointment flickered in Gavin's eyes, but he nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need." Sierra leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "It's not a no," she whispered. "It's just, I need to be." Sierra spent the afternoon at the equine hospital, sitting beside Tempest's stall, watching him gradually regain his strength. The stallion was still weak, his proud head hanging lower than usual, but his eyes were bright and alert. He nickered softly when he saw her, a sound that wrapped around her heart like a promise. "Hey, handsome," she murmured, stroking his neck. "You gave us quite a scare." The veterinarian had been pleased with his progress, cautiously optimistic about a full recovery. But the road ahead would be long. Weeks of careful feeding, limited exercise, and constant monitoring. Sierra had taken detailed notes, asking questions about every aspect of his care. If she did decide to leave, she wanted to make sure Gavin had everything he needed to keep Tempest healthy. If she decided to leave, the thought no longer felt inevitable, the way it always had before. For the first time in her adult life, Sierra was considering staying, putting down roots, building something lasting. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. "What do you think, Tempest?" she asked softly. "Should I take the risk?" The horse nudged her hand gently as if in answer. Sierra smiled. "You're right. You took a risk, trusting us again after all you'd been through. Maybe it's my turn to be brave." When she returned to the ranch that evening, she found Gavin on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. He stood as she approached, his face lighting up in a way that made her breath catch. "How is he?" Gavin asked. "Better than expected," Sierra replied. "The vet thinks he might be able to come home in a week, maybe less." Gavin's smile was tinged with relief. "That's wonderful news." He hesitated, then added, "I was worried you might not come back tonight." Sierra moved closer, drawn to the vulnerability in his admission. "I said I needed time to think, not that I was running away. For you, those have often been the same thing," Gavin observed gently. Sierra couldn't deny it. She'd spent her life running when things got complicated, when feelings got too deep. It was easier than risking rejection, abandonment, the pain she'd known too often. "Not this time," she said softly. "This time I'm staying until we figure this out." Something eased in Gavin's expression. He held out his hand, and Sierra took it, letting him pull her to sit beside him on the porch swing. The evening air was cool, scented with pine and the promise of autumn. Below them, the ranch spread out in golden splendor, shadowed by the mountains beyond. It was beautiful, a place that could be home if she let it. "I have something for you," Gavin said after a comfortable silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn leather pouch. Sierra looked at it curiously. "What is it? Open it," Gavin encouraged. Inside she found a key, old heavy brass, clearly not to any modern lock. "It belonged to Rebecca's grandmother," Gavin explained. "It opens the door to the old stable office. Rebecca turned it into a private retreat, a place to think, to create. She called it her sanctuary." Sierra held the key reverently, understanding the significance of the gift. "Gavin, I can't." "She would have wanted you to have it," Gavin interrupted gently. "Rebecca believed spaces had energies, memories. She thought that place had healing power." His voice softened. "I haven't been inside since she died. Couldn't bear to. But yesterday, watching you with Tempest in the hospital, I realized it was time to open the door again, let in the light." Sierra felt tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." Gavin's fingers intertwined with hers. "You don't have to say anything. Just consider it a place of your own if you decide to stay. A place of her own." The words resonated deep in Sierra's heart, a balm to the lifelong wound of never belonging anywhere, never having a space that was truly hers. "Show me," she asked. Gavin smiled, standing and pulling her gently to her feet. "Now?" Sierra nodded. Now, the old stable office was set apart from the main stables, a small stone building that might once have been a groundskeeper's cottage. Ivy climbed its walls, and a flowering jasmine framed the simple wooden door. Gavin stopped a few paces away. "I'll let you go in alone," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "It should be between you and the space." Sierra understood what he wasn't saying, that this was more than just showing her a room. It was Gavin letting go of one more piece, of his grief, making space for something new. With slightly trembling fingers, Sierra inserted the old key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a space that took Sierra's breath away. Windows on 3 sides filled the room with golden evening light. Bookshelves lined one. Wall filled with volumes on horses, art, nature. A comfortable-looking sofa with faded blue cushions sat beneath the largest window, offering a view of the mountains. But what caught Sierra's eye was the desk, a beautiful old roll-top, its surface covered with sketches of horses. Tempest, she realized, recognizing the proud arch of his neck, the intelligent eyes that Rebecca had captured perfectly. Sierra moved through the space slowly, touching things gently. The worn spines of books, the soft throw draped over the sofa, the collection of small stones and feathers arranged on a shelf. She could feel Rebecca's presence here, not as a ghost, but as an echo. The memory of a woman who had loved beauty, nature, this land. On the desk, Sierra found a small leather journal, its pages filled with Rebecca's handwriting. Thoughts, sketches, poems. She closed it quickly, not wanting to intrude too deeply on such private reflections. But as she did, a single page slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Sierra picked it up, intending to return it to the journal. But the words caught her eye, impossible to ignore. "I release you from your promises. Find happiness again, my love. This place deserves joy within its walls." The note was undated, the handwriting slightly different from the journal entries. More, hurried perhaps, or written in a different emotional state. Sierra felt a chill run through her. Had Rebecca written this just before her death? Had she somehow sensed what was coming? She carefully returned the note to the journal, her mind racing. Should she show it to Gavin? Would it bring him peace, or only raise more painful questions about what might have been? When she stepped back outside, Gavin was waiting, his face carefully neutral. "What do you think?" Sierra hesitated, deciding to keep the note to herself for now. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Peaceful. I can see why she loved it." Gavin nodded, his eyes on the little stone building. "She used to say it was the heart of the ranch, not the big house, not the stables. This little place where she could think and dream." Sierra looked at him, seeing the mix of grief and acceptance in his face. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Gavin's smile was bittersweet. "It needs someone in it again. Someone who understands horses the way she did, the way you do." The invitation was clear, but undemanding. Gavin was offering, not asking, giving her space to decide for herself. That night, Sierra couldn't sleep. She paced her cabin, thinking about the sanctuary, about Tempest, about Gavin, about Rebecca's note and what it might mean. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and headed back to the little stone building. The key turned easily in her hand, as if welcoming her return. Inside, she lit a small lamp, casting a warm glow over the room. She sat at the desk, running her fingers over Rebecca's sketches, feeling an unexpected kinship with the woman she had never met. After a moment's hesitation, Sierra opened the journal again, searching for the note she had found earlier. She needed to read it again, to be sure of what she had seen. But as she flipped through the pages, she found more than just that single note. The final entries of the journal told a story different from what she had expected. Rebecca had been planning to leave, yes, but not because she didn't love Gavin. According to her writings, she had been overwhelmed by the pressure to have a child, by the feeling that she was failing as a wife. She had wanted time away to find herself again, to remember who she was beyond being Mrs. Rourke. The last entry was dated the morning of her fatal ride. Talked to G before he left. It went badly. "He thinks I'm abandoning him, but I'm just trying to find my way back to myself, to us. Going to ride Tempest to clear my head. When G returns, we'll talk properly. I know we can find our way through this. Some paths are winding, but that doesn't mean they don't lead home. Sierra closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. Rebecca hadn't been leaving for good. She had been seeking clarity, a path forward for her marriage. And the accident had cut that journey tragically short. The loose note, the one granting Gavin permission to find happiness again, must have been written earlier, perhaps during another rough patch. Or maybe Rebecca had a premonition that morning, a sense that life was fragile and uncertain. Whatever the case, one thing was clear. Sierra needed to show Gavin these writings. He deserved to know that Rebecca's last thoughts about their marriage had been of reconciliation, not abandonment. Dawn was breaking as Sierra made her way to the main house, the journal clutched in her hands. She found Gavin in the kitchen, already awake, nursing a cup of coffee. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, then noticed her serious expression. What's wrong? Sierra placed the journal on the table between them. I found this in the sanctuary, she said quietly. Rebecca's journal. I shouldn't have read it, but a page fell out and then she took a deep breath. Gavin, there are things in here you need to see. Gavin stared at the journal as if it might bite him. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice rough. You need to, Sierra insisted gently. Especially the last entry, it changes things. Slowly, with evident reluctance, Gavin opened the journal to where Sierra had marked the final pages. She watched his face as he read, saw the shock, the pain, and finally something like peace wash over his features. When he looked up, his eyes were wet but clear. She wasn't really leaving, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She just needed space, time. Sierra nodded. And she believed you could work things out. She was coming back, Gavin. Gavin closed the journal carefully, his hands trembling slightly. All this time, I thought. He shook his head. The Montgomerys made it sound like she was done with me, with us, that I had failed her so completely there was no coming back. They probably didn't know, Sierra said. Maybe she only told them part of the story, or maybe they misunderstood. Or maybe they needed someone to blame, Gavin suggested, his tone without bitterness now. Grief does strange things to people. Sierra thought of the loose note, the one that had first caught her attention. There's something else, she said, opening the journal again and retrieving the page. I found this. It's not dated, but I think you should read it. Gavin took the page, his eyes widening as he read Rebecca's words of release. I don't know when she wrote this, he said after a long moment, but it feels like a gift. Permission, Sierra said softly, to move forward. Gavin's eyes met hers across the table, filled with a new lightness. Yes. He reached for her hand. Sierra, Before he could continue, the phone rang. Cutting through the moment, Gavin answered it, his expression shifting to concern, then relief as he listened. That was the hospital, he said after hanging up. Tempest had a comfortable night. They think he might be ready to come home in a few days, not a week. Sierra smiled, genuinely happy about the horse's progress. That's wonderful news. We should celebrate, Gavin suggested, and talk about everything. He glanced at the journal. About what happens next. Sierra felt a flutter of nervousness. Okay, she agreed, but first I need to do something. An hour later, Sierra stood at the top of the ridge where Rebecca's accident had occurred. The morning sun bathed the landscape in golden light, transforming the place that had held such tragedy. Below the valley stretched out, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance. Sierra had come seeking, what? Closure? Understanding? She wasn't entirely sure. But standing in the place where a woman's life had ended and, in many ways, Sierra's new life was beginning, she felt a need to acknowledge the connection. I never knew you, Sierra said aloud, her words carried away by the gentle breeze. But I know you love this land, these horses, him. She paused, feeling slightly foolish but compelled to continue. I'll take care of them, all of them, I promise. The wind seemed to strengthen for a moment, rustling the grass around her feet. Sierra wasn't a fanciful person, didn't believe in ghosts or signs, but in that moment she felt a sense of rightness, of permission, granted not just by Gavin, but by the woman who had loved him first. When she returned to the ranch, Sierra found Gavin in the stables preparing a stall for Tempest's return. He looked up as she entered, his face softening at the sight of her. "Where did you disappear to?" he asked. "The ridge," Sierra replied simply. "I needed to make peace with what happened there." Understanding dawned in Gavin's eyes. "And did you?" Sierra nodded. "I think I did. And I made a decision." Gavin stilled, waiting. "If the offer still stands," Sierra said, her heart racing, "I'd like to stay, not just for a while, for good." The joy that broke across Gavin's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, gathering her into his arms. "The offer definitely still stands," he murmured against her hair. "For as long as you want." Sierra leaned back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I don't know how to do this, how to build a life in one place, with one person." "I'm scared too," Gavin confessed. "Scared of loving and losing again." His hands tightened on her waist. "But I think being scared is part of being alive. And I want to be alive again, Sierra. With you." Sierra felt the last of her resistance melt away. She had spent so long running, protecting herself from pain. But what about joy? What about the chance to build something real, lasting? "Then let's be scared together," she said, echoing his words from days before. "And brave together. And happy together." Gavin's kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise in itself. When they parted, both were smiling, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep and true. "So," Gavin said, laughter in his voice, "what's next for the famous horse whisperer, now that you've tamed the untamable Tempest?" Sierra grinned. "Well, I was thinking about expanding. This ranch has plenty of land for a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses." She gestured around them. "With the right facilities, the right approach, we could help a lot of animals." "We," Gavin repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." "I thought you might," Sierra teased. Then, growing serious, she added, "But only if you're really ready to build something new, I mean, together." Gavin nodded, his eyes clear and certain. More than ready, in fact. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There's something I want to show you." He led her to his office in the main house, a space Sierra had not entered before. Unlike Rebecca's sanctuary, which was all light and openness, Gavin's office was darker, more formal. Heavy wooden furniture, leather-bound books, a massive desk covered in papers. Gavin went to a drawer and pulled out a large envelope. "I've been working on this for a few weeks," he explained, spreading the contents across the desk. "Ever since you started working with Tempest, actually." Sierra looked at the plans in surprise. They were architectural drawings for a complex of buildings, stables, paddocks, a small clinic and living quarters, a horse rehabilitation center just like she had suggested. "You've been planning this?" she asked, amazed. "But you didn't know I would stay." Gavin shrugged, looking almost sheepish. "I hoped, and even if you didn't, I think I knew this was what the ranch needed next. What I needed." Sierra studied the plans more carefully, noting the thoughtful details, the careful integration with the existing structures. "This is incredible." "There's more," Gavin said, pulling out another sheet. "This is the old stable office, Rebecca's sanctuary. I had the architect draw up plans to connect it to a larger cabin, a home for you, or for us eventually, if you want that." Sierra looked at the drawing, the little stone building she already loved, extended with a beautiful cabin that complemented its style perfectly. A home of her own, yet connected to Gavin's world. "It's perfect," she whispered, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "All of it. It's exactly what I would have designed myself." Gavin's smile was both pleased and relieved. "So you'll do it? Run the rehabilitation center? Make this place your home?" Sierra didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said firmly. "To all of it." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of planning, preparation, and shared joy. Sierra and Gavin visited Tempest daily, pleased with his steady recovery. The veterinarians were impressed with his progress, attributing it to his otherwise excellent condition and perhaps his will to return home. He knows he has something to come back to, Sierra told them, exchanging a smile with Gavin. Meanwhile, the Montgomerys had unexpectedly withdrawn their legal challenge after Gavin shared Rebecca's journal with them. The truth of their daughter's final thoughts had shifted something in them, not healing their grief entirely, but redirecting it from anger to a quieter sadness. They've even offered to help fund the rehabilitation center, Gavin told Sierra, one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. As a memorial to Rebecca, Sierra leaned against his shoulder, content. She would have liked that, I think. Yes, Gavin agreed. She would have. The day Tempest came home was clear and bright, the kind of autumn day that seems to hold all of summer's warmth in a gentler embrace. Sierra and Gavin waited at the ranch as the horse trailer pulled up the long driveway. Tempest emerged cautiously, his once proud step more measured now, but his eyes bright and alert. He nickered when he saw them, a sound of recognition of coming home. Sierra led him slowly to his prepared stall, larger than before, with a view of the paddock where he would eventually be able to exercise. The stallion followed willingly, trusting her completely now. "Welcome home, boy," she murmured, stroking his neck. "Welcome home." That evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, Sierra and Gavin took a bottle of champagne to the ridge, the place where everything had ended for Rebecca and where so much had begun for them. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" Sierra asked as Gavin spread a blanket on the ground. It might seem wrong, but Gavin shook his head, his face peaceful. "Not wrong. Right. This place needs new memories, Sierra. Happy ones." They sat together, shoulders touching, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Gavin poured champagne into 2 glasses, handing one to Sierra. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, "and to facing our fears together." Sierra clinked her glass against his. "To staying," she added, "and to finding home." They drank in comfortable silence, the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them, filled with possibilities. Later, as they walked hand in hand back toward the house, their house now, or soon to be, Sierra felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never known before. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "all my life I've thought the most important thing was to be free, to be able to leave whenever I wanted, to never be trapped." Gavin squeezed her hand. "And now?" Sierra smiled, looking up at the man who had shown her that sometimes the bravest thing isn't running away, but staying. "Now I think true freedom is being able to choose where you belong, who you belong with." Gavin stopped, turning to face her in the silvery moonlight. "And have you chosen, Sierra Blake?" She reached up, her palm against his cheek. "Yes," she said simply. "I've chosen this place, these horses." She smiled. "You." Gavin's kiss held everything they had been through together. Pain and healing, fear and courage, endings and beginnings. And as Sierra melted into his embrace, she felt the whispers in the wind around them, no longer echoes of loss, but promises of a future waiting to unfold. A month later, on a crisp autumn morning, Sierra stood in the doorway of Rebecca's sanctuary, her sanctuary now, watching as construction began on the rehabilitation center. Beside her, Gavin held the updated plans, discussing details with the architect. From the paddock nearby came the sound of a horse's whinny. Tempest now recovered enough for light exercise, enjoying the freedom of open space once more. Sierra smiled, thinking of how far they had all come. The horse who had lost his trust, the man who had lost his way, the woman who had never let herself belong anywhere, all healing, all finding their way home. That afternoon, as Sierra worked with Tempest in the round pen, her phone rang. Another ranch, another desperate owner with a troubled horse. "I can refer you to someone excellent," Sierra told them. "But I'm afraid I'm not taking any more traveling jobs. I'm home now." Home. The word still felt new on her tongue, but right, completely right. As she hung up, she saw Gavin watching her from the fence, his face filled with love and understanding. He had heard her words, knew what they meant. Sierra walked to him, slipping easily into the circle of his arms. "That was the Henderson Ranch in Colorado," she explained. "They have a mayor with trust issues." "And you turned them down," Gavin said, his tone questioning. Sierra nodded. "I turned them down." Gavin's arms tightened around her. "No regrets?" "None," Sierra said firmly, looking out over the ranch, her ranch now, her future. "My traveling days are over. The horses can come to me now." "To us," Gavin corrected gently. Sierra smiled up at him, her heart full. "To us," she agreed. Above them, the Montana sky stretched vast and blue, the wind whispering through the pines, not of secrets now, but of promises kept, of fears faced, of hearts finally, bravely, home. The end.